Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Localis Public Policy webinar. My name's Jonathan Warren. I'm the Chief Executive of Localis, which I hope is everyone's favourite independent think tank of place. Today, there's always a gift in local government that keeps on giving. In the last government, it was the levelling up agenda. We couldn't get enough of that in terms of policy things tacked onto it. And I guess in the early years of this government, it should have been devolution, but it's really kind of local government reorganisation, which has been that policy gift that's kept us all talking, busy with research, policy and all the rest of it. So this is a policy webinar. It's for fans of mid-80s adult-oriented rock. And it's not even my title, Callan came up with it. We have the Toto-tastic title of Hold the Line. Is local government reorganisation still the plan, or are we heading for a rethink? To debate, to kick the tyres on this, we have, as ever, a strong and, from our attitude, is always gratitude, fantastic panel of speakers. Professor Colin Copus, Emeritus Professor de Montfort University, our expert on local government constitution. From the Local Government Chronicle, acting editor and marathon man Martin George. From the newly founded Association for Monitoring Officers, for those with a classical background, AMO means I love. We certainly love what you're doing, Rachel McCoy. And from Solace Managing Director Graham MacDonald to answer, where are we on this? So I'll just briefly set the scene before asking our panelists to come in. It's not our first rodeo doing this, so please, we're expecting good questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat if you can avoid it, but please in the Q&A box, because there's a lot to talk about. So clearly on the, we were talking about this earlier, Graham, in terms of, you made a very good point. The only thing guaranteed about this process, the biggest structural change in 50 years, creating new authorities to increase productivity, streamline governance and all the rest, is there's a huge logistical and political challenge. And ultimately, everyone's going to be unhappy to some extent. If this was a Netflix comedy drama, I'd call it nobody wants this, because in terms of how do we get here, going back to December 2024, we're all waiting on tenterhooks in that December for publication of English devolution white paper. Well, MHCLG wanted devolution. Treasury had to get their pound of flesh, which was local government reorganisation, to give us the wonderful efficiencies which were promised in that PwC report. So usher in a bout of internecine constructive dialogue and struggle in assembling the business and the political cases. Sprinkle over this the low drama of local elections being cancelled and then put back in case again, while pushing the mayoral vote 2 years down the line to 2028, and bringing us slap bang into the middle of relevance from last week. Last week we saw LGR agreements in 4 of the 6 DPP areas. So in if this was a meatloaf, 2 out of 3 ain't bad might be the answer there. But without a single county unitary answer, which presumably was the basis on which the PwC figures were meant to stack up. And it meant 3 unitaries apiece for Suffolk and Norfolk, 5 for Essex and Hampshire, and the South Coast Sussexes on the naughty step, and told to rethink. But intriguingly, meeting none of the population thresholds of 500,000. In fact, as somebody noted, it was the death of the 250,000 population model. As ever, who's winning, who's losing? It's seen as an advantage to the newly established local councils network, it's fair to say, but who before all this would have wanted the preservation of the status quo, perhaps a damage to the county desire to have single unitaries in this. And going back to your point, Graham, perhaps it was inevitable that in the top-down rush, again, you've got to question why was the haste in this? Could this been it's such an abridged 2-year process with a 5, 7, 10-year program to build into being better? It was bound inevitably to disappoint everyone along the chain if it was, in civil service parlance, doomed to success. So in this webinar with our panel of experts, we want to ask how this stacks up in terms of the leading questions. There's nothing wrong with the leading question. Can we kick the tires on this? Is LGR itself now at risk of a U-turn with everything else happening on the national stage and international, let alone the vexed issue of next May's local elections? Is this an issue of legitimacy versus deliverability? Is this democratically strong, but does this weaken delivery capacity? And does the trade-off make further reversals more likely? What's the legal aspect on this? Is law a policy constraint? Is this process going to be subject to judicial review? What does this mean for ministerial ability to manoeuvre on reorganisation and devolution? And what about the cost of reversal? Are we underpricing the significant costs of this transition, and especially the kind of the stop-start nature of trying to do this with devolution, with planning and all the other things local government are trying to do to keep the show on the road in matters of life and death like social care and all the rest of it? So those are the leading questions I've asked our panel to debate. I'm going to ask them in the following order, if that is good for my panel. So, Colin, you normally go last, but I think the challenge is if you could go first today, followed by Rachel, followed by Martin, with Graham leading the tail. Once they've all had their say to start thinking, please come in with your questions and answers, and we'll wrap up the discussion by high noon. So onwards we go. Colin, what's your take on all this? Can we hold the line on LGR?
Well, I hope the line gets broken and the whole nonsense stops, would be my my opening gambit, I suppose. There's one good thing for me that's come out of this whole sorry story, and that is at least the government has not stuck to its lunatic position of 500,000 populations. I'm not aware of a system of local government anywhere across the globe that is structured on asking one question: how many people do we need? And where this idea came from is a very, very long story, which a colleague of mine, Steve Leach, has covered in her book. So I'll do a quick Matt Goodwin. Here we are. Here it is. And the explanation as to how we got to this very strange point is sort of given in some detail in that. What I would say very quickly is this is part, I would argue, of a 50-plus year journey. In 1974, the reorganisation that took place then was by no means seen by the centre, i.e. the civil service of the day, to be the end of the story. In fact, it was the beginning. Civil service at the time didn't get what they wanted, which was Maud's 58 unitary councils across the whole of England, which would give us today councils with average populations of 990 odd thousand, not shy of the 500,000, although somewhat over it. And every time there has been an opportunity to reorganise local government in the centre's image, that's where we have found ourselves going. What we haven't done in this whole so-called journey of devolution is to look across the sea and look at the sorts of powers, responsibilities, functions and financing regimes that exist in local government, not in a sort of some mythological world, but actually exist, and the way local government operates. And look at some of those and say, well, what can we import into this country and that would work here? We have a one-trick pony, which is increasing the size of local government. And my answer, or my question rather, is how big do you want to go? At what point have you got big enough? And I've already answered that by saying I think the secret agenda is to move towards, or as close as possible, to 58 unitary councils across England. How do I know that that's the case? Because in various events like this, I've asked this of civil servants and they've denied it vociferously. And I always argue that the more vociferous the denial, the more accurate the accusation is. So I think this is part of the journey that we're on. I'd also, I was chuck this into the pot. The last sort of real statement on the constitutional position of local government came with the Widdicombe Committee in 1986. I'm sure some of us will remember that. And what that report said in one of its paragraphs, one of its very powerful statement, it's all local authorities are the statutory creations of Parliament and have no independent status or right to exist. The whole system of local government could be lawfully abolished by an act of Parliament. Now, if any government was serious about devolution, that would be the first doctrine that they would change. They would give local government an independent right to exist, protected in a constitution, difficult to do when we don't have a written constitution, I know. And then start to devolve from the centre to local government. I suppose, you know, another hand grenade to chuck in, and then I'll stop in this part. There's some, you know, this obsession with unitary local government is again something we have in this country. There are very few other systems of local government across the globe, and certainly in Europe, that are unitary. And there's one system of unitary local government in Europe, which I know, having been over there recently, they are currently looking to introduce a county level of government between the centre and their municipalities, rather than stick to a unitary system. But what the government's actually done, when you look at it, by scrapping the existing councils, creating bigger ones, although smaller than they were originally intended to do, and then creating combined authorities with directly elected mayors, they've effectively reinvented the two-tier system on a bigger scale. Interestingly, they've said no new parish councils. We don't want you to reinvent the two-tier system by creating parish councils, but we're going to reinvent the two-tier system by creating combined authorities on a much bigger scale. So if unitary local government is so good, why are we reinventing a two-tier system? There you go. On that bombshell, I'll...
Colin, many thanks for that high-level take on the Constitution, and I'll say this for the sake of our audience. No accusations of artificial intelligence have been levelled against your book. It's all human intelligence, right?
Well, of a sort, I guess. You know. Yes, thank you. No chat GP here.
Great. Well, Colin, many thanks. So from the constitutional to the legal, the wonderful Rachel McCoy, who've been in the front line working in district councils recently. Rachel, I'd really love to hear your take on where this is and how you see the importance of the issues we're trying to raise today.
Yeah, well, I think what I would say about it all is, you know, the capacity piece is just a massive concern, how this is actually going to be done within the time frame with the, you know, the resources that we currently have. And you know, we are just losing so many people due to retirement, and loads of people are leaving the sector. They've literally said after these elections, that is it, you know, they're not going to see LGR through because, you know, all the anxieties and worries that come with that. So what we've had just last week is, you know, a bit more, you know, I don't know, decision making on what these arrangements are going to look like. Currently, I'm working down in Essex, so it's like on the Essex side of things. But it's just literally the next steps of how this is actually going to play out. Just on, I think, you know, £900,000 is just, you know, per new authority to get going. I mean, that's a low amount of money. The government has said that is to be kind of ring fenced on transition. So, and quite specific, you know, digital IT, we need all of those things, absolutely. I mean, the integration piece is massive, and disaggregation of all of that within it. But, you know, the prescription on it that they, you know, that they put, kind of the caveats on how that is spent, then does mean then you can't get the resources in. So, you know, there will be a need for kind of interim and, you know, that type of support to get everyone through the next steps, because the resource isn't there. It wasn't there anyway, let alone in this new, the new journey, the new landscape going forward. It isn't there. You can't invent people or just create them out of thin air. So, the internal teams that are already on their knees. From the legal perspective, there's major worries in, how this work is going to be delivered whilst ramping up for all these elections. Elections take an inordinate amount of time and resource to put in. And now we've got a situation where, there's lots of sets of elections are back on when they weren't. So all of a sudden, that takes a lot of kind of capacity out of departments to then refocus. And that's going to be a continuum, because it will be then for the shadows and then for, the actual authorities once they come on stream. Interestingly, just in some recent research that the local government lawyer did, they surveyed just legal practitioners in local government, and 86% of those respondents cited major concerns about being safe and legal. So that is a real worry, because it is us lawyers in local government that will be tasked with drafting these constitutions, looking at all these agreements, just making sure that everything is in place, and that takes many years. So I know that we've got till vesting day, that someone described it as that. Well, that's just a tiny bit of the story. There's like years and years to come following that. And I think just in the immediate, what is concerning is how we move on just with those initial discussions. This is just like literally now, when at the moment there are legal challenges or threats of legal challenges, then that delays things even further, because as part of the teams that will be taken forward the the new arrangements, in some of those cases the leads are the ones at county that could be judicially reviewing. So I don't know how that works if you've got a team that's going to take forward like those discussions, but it's a massive conflict of interest. I mean, I would have thought. So I think there are mega concerns and constraints within that. And I think, just as Graham said, just kind of before we kind of got started on this, for a lot of people it's like kind of something like who wanted it anyway. But I think that it's kind of too big at the moment to kind of that thing about being too big to fail. So it will continue, I think, just because it would be it's just too big to like put the pause on, unfortunately. So we're just going to be dragged into it at a time when there just isn't any funding anyway. So where's more funding going to come from? I can't really see immediately where these savings will come. It's much further down, like maybe a 50 years time or something. But for now, those are the real concerns kind of from monitoring officers and just legal teams across the country.
Rachel, many thanks for your point of view and to those concerns about capacity and getting past vesting day. Martin George, acting editor at Local Government Chronicle, clearly been following this attentively since the get-go. It'd be great to hear your views of how you see this unfolding.
I think it's a really timely webinar coming just after the government's announcement of those devolution priority area results. I know the government said last week that the decisions it made on those areas do not set precedents for the remaining 14 areas, but I think it is worth trying to draw out perhaps some themes or suggestions of what that it might mean. I think the first thing is that the government is still committed to LGR, to answer that point. People had been saying that if we hadn't seen this announcement come before Easter, there would have been more questions about whether it really was committed to it. I think that's answered. Of course, who knows if there's a new Prime Minister after May, chuck all that in the air. Let's not go down that rabbit hole, but bear it in the back of your mind maybe. I think it's clear from Steve Reed's letters to the councils that he's seen LGR through the prism of house building as a very important consideration. So when you look at his justifications for the Suffolk decisions, going for 3 unitaries rather than 1. When you look at his decision not to make a decision on East Sussex and Brighton and Hove, for example, the ability to build lots more houses was very much at the front of his mind. I think it's worth noting that the LGR that is being delivered is a bit different to what was originally raised back in December 2014. I think, Jonathan, you mentioned the population threshold. The government originally was saying most new councils should be around about 500,000 people. I think the average population for the new councils that were announced last week is more like 350,000. That's a pretty substantial drop. They also originally had said that changing boundaries, using the districts not as building blocks, but sort of changing boundaries here where there are parishes, would be an exception. It seems to be the rule. I think 9 of the 15 new councils involve dozens of parishes being moved from here or there. And I think the effect of those 2 changes is to make this a perhaps more, in party political terms, a more Labour friendly, in normal circumstances, configuration of councils. It certainly means that it's more geographically specific. And I think the point I make there is that, as well as not forgetting the party politics of this, don't forget why the government said it wanted to do LGR in the first place, which is for its bigger picture, its bigger project of devolution across England. And it sees these unitary councils as the building blocks of strategic authorities, hopefully in the government's eyes, with a mayor. So I think it's worth thinking, what do these new unitary councils mean for the devolution project? If we're having, say, in Suffolk 3 councils rather than 1, or Hampshire 5 rather than 3, whatever the lower number was, it means more voices around the mayor's table, more constituent authorities helping to make decisions. That means probably more political party rosettes around that table, so more scope for party political disagreements. It also means more specific geographies around the table, so more special pleasing is probably the wrong way to phrase it, but stronger fighting for rural issues from some voices, for urban issues from others, from coastal communities from others. So I think it'll be a real test of devolution. If we've got more distinct voices around the combined authority table, will all those people be able to rise above party and their very local interests and think about the wider place that the strategic authority represents? I think really that's what I wanted to say initially, but lots more to discuss, no doubt.
Martin, many thanks, and thanks for bringing the place politics of it to the fore, which is good. And finally, so Graham MacDonald, Managing Director, Solis, obviously great interest to your members in terms of leadership across the sector. Let's have your take, please. You're muted, mate.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. Yes, it's we've been on this roller coaster, haven't we, for a long, long time. I started in local government over 30 years ago, and we were talking about LGR then, and we're still talking about it now. So it does feel like one of those conversations that never goes away. And as I said, it has been quite a roller coaster, and I think we're on a downward dip at the moment, where we're accelerating fast into a new set of reorganisation. But whether there is a loop ahead of us or not is difficult to say. I think, as far as, I mean, it does feel like we've got a pretty clear path forward. But of course, more now than ever, issues outside of our control and new prime ministers and other things does mean that that can change pretty quickly. It does feel like we've got a space for reorganisation to happen between now and a general election in 2029. which does give us that time, politically at least, to get through a significant chunk of what's remaining. And therefore, as far as your kind of overarching question is concerned, it feels, all things being equal, which they probably won't be, it feels like you've got that time and space to do it. In any other environment with a majority in Parliament that we have, it would feel like pretty plain sailing. I guess the real issue, though, is, while that might feel like that from a political perspective, actually, the actual, locally doing the transition is going to be really tough. And at a time where transformation of public services is so required, it's quite the distraction. It's taking resources away from other transformation that we could be doing, and it's taking us away from sort of the government's own agenda, really, around integration of services, prevention, focusing more on preventative activity and bringing decision making closer to the front line and closer to people. So, in a sense, one of the reasons that, irrespective of what individuals' views might be on what the right size of local government is concerned, I think there was almost unanimity in terms of a fear that this distracts us right at the time where public services needed to change most significantly. And I think we're now in a timetable where safe and legal becomes more and more a priority, and Rachel's already mentioned that, and therefore the transformative potential that there may be from creating new unitaries feels even further away when the focus is going to be inevitably on safe and legal, which is the correct place to start, but shouldn't really be the limit of our ambitions. So I suspect this will continue. There does feel like there's enough space in the legal timetable before another general election, on the assumption that that will be a long term. If that doesn't change, it feels from a legal perspective like we probably have got the time to get through that, and that this will happen. But I'm sure there'll be bumps on the road and legal challenges, etc. But yes, structural change orders in the autumn feel the most likely scenario, and then we'll progress on from there. So I suspect that we're on that road, and it will be a fairly speedy downward trajectory towards those new unitaries before long. Thanks, Jonathan.
Graham, many thanks for rounding up that analysis, and that's thanks to our four panelists. So, and we've got doing well for time. We've got more than half an hour to answer queries or to keep the debate going. I'm going to look at the Q&A box, and I've got two related questions. One from Danny Kay, one from another friend of the Localis, David Godfrey. Danny asks, are we heading for a neither fish nor fowl situation, a lack of clarity and substance in the regional role above the new unitary? So going back to your question, Colin, about this creation of this new two-tier by another name, a larger regional, sub-regional subset with the unitaries below. And David asks, good question, does the surge of interest in parishes and towns undermine the case being made for the smaller unitaries, as in what is the appropriate scale, what is place in this context? Anyone like to come in on either of those or both?
I'll chip in something.
Thank you, Colin.
I'm just reflecting on those 2 points. Is it fish or fowl? I think fowl, but I'll spell it in a different way. If you compare this process to the last really major national overhaul of local government back in 1972, sorry with the history lessons, but I think we can learn from this. Previous to that reorganisation, there was a 3-year Royal Commission which explored the role, functions, purposes of local government and of council. There was a 3-year gap and debate between that commission and the legislation being passed, and then there was a 2-year gap between the legislation being passed and the new councils coming online. An 8-year process. This government, within a few months of taking office, as you made a point earlier, Jonathan, has rushed this. And what worries me is something that Martin said and pointed out, is that this reorganisation isn't being driven by what's good for local government and for local communities. It's being driven by government priorities, economic growth and housing. Okay, so we restructure the whole of local government on those two central government policies. What happens when that changes? What happens when those priorities change? When we've got enough housing and we've got a strong economy, we reorganise local government yet again to suit another set of national policies. And that's the problem that we have in this country, is that our local government system is a plaything of the centre for it to shape on its priorities and its policies. And in the whole of that, what gets forgotten about is the real communities of place, which are often represented by parishes. I'm not suggesting we only have parish councils, but they're a building block within which we can start to look at a sensible system of local government. So this, most definitely, we're ending up with the best worst job, if that is actually what is going to happen. Because again, somebody said we can't predict from this, and I think that's absolutely right. Could well be different somewhere else, apart from the political benefits to certain parties. And I would just chip in as well. Again, one of the other things that Martin said about the number of voices around the mayor's table, that sounded brilliant to me. That's exactly what we should have. Lots of voices around that mayor's table, because there's never one voice that speaks for an entire area. Even if that person is elected, there are lots of competing interests, and those competing interests have got the right to be heard and be part of that decision-making process. So the more the merrier, I would argue.
Many thanks, Colin. Martin, Rachel, Graham, any further thoughts, reflection you want to take forward, please?
Yeah, Jonathan, just quickly on that last point, I think that's absolutely right. If you look at on the combined authority piece, it certainly feels, certainly from the work that Solace has done in a range of combined authorities and worked with them, and some of our members that sit there, the ones that have been the most effective, and there is it's a relatively small sample, so you can extrapolate too much, but the ones that seem to be most successful are the ones with a larger number of council leaders across, around that table. So I think that's a positive thing in that respect, actually. The ones that seem to struggle, not universally, but are often the ones where there are a smaller number of constituent authorities, and therefore, though the clashes that are created, have a magnifying effect within that smaller echo chamber, so to speak. So I think that is definitely a positive thing. Ultimately, though, I think there is something that does go back to understanding what the role of local government is in the UK and what we want from local government. I can come up with an argument to have local government at any number of different sizes and structures, and they are, there isn't a universal, there isn't a model out there in the rest of the world that works perfectly. No one would suggest that. Everybody is tweaking their structures from time to time and reaching for that structural change to improve things. That never really works out. In some places, in some states of America, you've got children's services the size of Texas. In other places, it's done very differently. And across Europe is similar in terms of quite the diversity of different approaches. So I don't think there's a perfect one. At the end of the day, it is a political choice in terms of what you prioritise, in terms of size and scale and efficiency. So I think the most important thing for me is that it doesn't feel like it's the key driver of transformation at the moment. and is therefore a bit of a distraction. So that's where we should, if we can focus ourselves more on that and think about how we can change public services for the better, and yeah, create a definition of what local government therefore needs to deliver within that, but do that and get on with things, because there are much bigger issues that local government and places across our country are trying to grapple with, rather than quite where the boundaries should be in their local area.
Many thanks, Graham. Martin, Rachel, want to take up any of that, or should we move on, please? Martin.
Just very quickly, Danny's question about the sort of lack of clarity and substance in the regional role. It probably also applies to the unitary tier as well, possibly. I think some people in local government see a danger that Whitehall now sees the mayors and that sub-regional tier as where all the important action is. I mean, you look at the visitor levy that's being consulted on, the idea is that that's a mayoral function, planning powers going to mayors and so on. So I think there's something for local government to watch out for is what does the government see local government's role in the future, and almost fighting to make sure that it has a genuine role, making genuine decisions, and it isn't just seen as a sort of delivery arm, delivery branch of the mayors. So I think seeing how Whitehall and Westminster see local government in this new strategic authority landscape is something to watch very carefully.
Many thanks indeed. Rachel, want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that. It is about just making sure that resident voice, the community, I mean, it goes back to what is local government for, but well, it's for communities and residents, isn't it? So therefore, I really feel that, there is this kind of disengagement at the moment, and that's for probably lots of different reasons, just how kind of society is at the moment. So we've seen lots of fragmentation, and within that, I think that it's important just to make sure that voice is brought in. So whether that's through parishes, which they actually serve a really, really important function. That is it, isn't it? It's on the ground. That's what they're doing. So as structures are established, it is that making sure that it isn't just the same thing. Like, it's just central government, isn't it? The different guys. It's making sure it does actually deliver the whole thing of what this is meant to be, a big shake-up. But as what has been expressed already, if it is that delivery arm for housing regeneration, then that's the purview. Then that is the trajectory, isn't it? And the mandate and diktat. So it just needs to, exactly what Martin said, just keep an eye on how we do that, but in a genuine way, and that is actually means something. And it's we're not just it's just not smoke and mirrors. It's actually about real delivery for real people.
Many thanks indeed. Well, we've got some good questions in the Q&A box. My fear is, but will we be able to answer them all? So I'll pick them off. Some of it politics related, some are policy. The politics one, good friend of the Localis, Samir Begin, takes your point, Martin, about creating perhaps Labour-friendly areas. Could there be, he asked, could that be what's driving Sussex and Brighton, reinforcing Labour's position in exchange for what might be a more pragmatic westward expansion? And John O'Brien makes a very good point ahead of that in 6 weeks' time, we may have a larger number of councils controlled by parties hostile to LGR, and the prospect of dismantling certain authorities. Will this hostility have any practical consequences for how the process proceeds? So firstly, what do we do about those urban islands in rural seas, the Ipswiches, the Brightons? Is this being driven by partiality? And what might be the rail politic after May 7th, 8th? Anyone?
I'm sure I can jump in quickly. And more on John's point. I think that the attitude that councils will take now they have decisions about LGR is really important. And I think when you talk to councils that have already unitarised, and when you talk to them quietly off the record, so they're not airing dirty linen in public, they can be quite frank that the attitudes that the legacy councils took can be really decisive, and some can be in denial that they're being abolished or their favoured option didn't come about. Some could be openly hostile. Positions can be entrenched, especially if we're seeing legal challenges, which will actually make it harder for these councils to come together and form the new authority. And a lot of people will have grief that the council that they've worked for 30 years, perhaps representing the place that they lived in and grew up in, is being abolished. So I think absolutely new councillors who may be hostile to this, but even the legacy of officers and existing councillors and the attitude, whether they say, right, we have a decision, we might not like it, we're going to get on with it and unitarise, or whether there will be this friction, some intentional, some not perhaps, again, is I think going to be a big challenge over the next 2 or 3 years.
Many thanks, Martin. Anyone else, any thoughts on the politics?
Can I just add something very quick? I think what Martin said is right, and that process needs to be managed. But of course, it all depends on who the electorate elect. They could well be voting for these new councils, people who have not been councillors before, and don't necessarily bring this with them. They may well be voting for people that didn't want the new council to be constructive. My experience is that most councillors get on with the job of what they've got to do. And often what does tend to happen in some of the bigger unitary councils, though, is that not so much the party political issues, but the geographical tensions come out more and more. And I promised the people that told me this I wouldn't mention their names or indeed the council, but I was told by a group of officers and councillors that there is a new unitary authority created some years ago where members and officers have to look at a map to find out where they're talking about within this huge new council that's been created. Now, that's a shocking position to be in. I think it's a result of where we're going, but it also indicates, look, we may have our party political differences, but my heavens, if you get an area within this new council that thinks it's the forgotten area, and I think all of us have had experience of places saying we're the forgotten part of this borough, going to get a lot worse in some of these new unitary councils, and that's a different take on the politics. I think, yes, there will be party political differences, but I think there's going to be geographical differences.
Many thanks, Colin. Take it or leave it, Rachel or Graham. Otherwise, we've got more questions. Come in.
I was just going to make the point that I think there is a grieving process that officers and members go through, as has been described, almost irrespective of what a view is, and it's stronger or weaker depending on the individuals. But what it does tend to do is then take you down closer to that safe and legal route and focus around there rather than some of the other choices that you might make when you're going through that sort of change. So I think that if we do see that, then we will see legal challenges and things like that will seek to slow the process down. It will take us more into that safe and legal position and real focus around that, and ensuring that councils get to that point on time, and perhaps miss out on some of the opportunities that there might otherwise be, but also avoid some of the risks that there might also be too. So yes, but I think that will certainly have an impact, won't it?
Sure will. Rachel, any thoughts, comments from you on that side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think just what Graham said there. I think when you're kind of feel like you're in defending your position or in a hostile environment, then it kills innovation. You just can't. There's no room or scope for that if it's just kind of like, let's firefight, let's get through, let's hold it, let's hold the ring, and that's a real shame, if we do end up in that kind of space where, for all it is, there is that opportunity, like through some innovative thinking and thinking about doing things a bit differently in terms of integration and how we look at different service provisions and the whole intervention piece, once we get there. But I do think that, yes, if we end up in, kind of everyone taking their stance and it gets all a bit silly, then everyone loses out, isn't it? And it goes back to that, what's it all for? And just ensuring that stays front and center. For the little people, like, we're still here, this is for us, okay? So I think it's really important to just keep that in focus.
Many thanks, Rachel. Well, we've got some cracking questions in the Q&A. We've got some about public services and organisation, some around placemaking. I'll pluck two related ones. Laura Taylor asks, she'd like to get the panel views on the trend of LGR decisions just issued. Do they hinder public service transformation as whole health reform, police reform, SEND, etc.? Is there enough capacity for systems thinking to create effective public services? And Kieran Herwood asks, any thoughts from the panel about what the benefits we might get from LGR, the nature of reorganised authorities, or about the costs of the transition to get there? Are we sacrificing ambitious transformation, in summary, over getting the safe and legal over-vesting day? How do you see this in terms of the public service transformation journey at local level?
I'm happy to come in on Laura's question because I think it's a really, really good one. I think there is a real concern that there isn't a coordinating kind of brain at the centre of public service reform at the moment, and all the multiple reorganisations that all seem to be happening at the same time and are not, it appears, not as well coordinated as they could be. Government has talked about wanting to improve the integration of services, wanting to focus on prevention in its public service reform, but it does seem to do that down its departmental silos rather than having a coordination across the top. And I think there are some benefits that could be gained from doing that in a far better way with a clearer, more strategic approach, so that those things can join together and not necessarily, and in some circumstances seem to be actively rubbing against each other, which I think creates more friction when actually what we're looking for is less friction.
Many thanks, Graham. Any other panelists want to jump in on the public service side?
I think very briefly, that thing about Whitehall silos is very relevant when you look at police reforms, which look like they're going to set up sort of mega police authorities, which are far bigger than the strategic authorities, and look at what the Department of Health is doing in ICB reforms. I think that lack of a coordinating brain is at the local level and the national level.
Many thanks, Martin. Do you have a view, Colin, on effective? Is this really going to make things better, more connected local public services? Or
I don't follow a logic of why it would, but I think you don't have to reorganise local government to transform public services. The two aren't inherently intertwined. And again, I take lessons from models elsewhere, where you can create structures or even just working relationships where councils are able to work together within a much looser framework than we seem to have here, and want to make, in fact, even tighter. And transforming public services rests with those people that are closest to the authorities. And I'm taken by something Rachel said about, the people that are receiving these things. So I don't think there's any need to reorganise local government to improve public services. There's no need to reorganise local government to effectively devolve either. And many councils across Europe are providing a far wider range of services. I chuck a few examples of gas, water, electricity, hospitals rest with some municipalities and councils in some systems somewhere than our authorities provide. And there's been a constant sort of churn of taking public service responsibility away. And I think that's what concerns me, is that at some point, laugh if you will, but at some point somebody somewhere is going to say, well, all of these elected mayors we have and these combined authorities are providing some wonderful services. Why do we need all these local authorities within them? Why don't we just scrap them and have, well, we can't call it a combined authority because there's nothing combined, but we'll just have this mayoral authority because everything's been running so well. I know that moves away from public services to a certain extent, but I think the logic is still there, that we need to be looking at the services we do. And Graham made a very interesting point earlier as well about, in the States, children's services might be on the size of Texas and somewhere else it's a different organisation. Again, that's diversity. What we need is to say what, in certain areas that councils are able to identify themselves, what do we need to do with public services and what's the best way of organising it? And how can we work with others? Some areas that might be sub-regional, some areas it might be much more local. But we take that element of flexibility out of the system where local government thinks that structure will solve everything. And I don't think it does.
Many thanks, Colin. Well, I still got you. We've got, we'll talk about parishes, then we're going to go back to the placemaking, back up to combined. Justin Griggs, the inevitable NAUC question, picking up on Rachel's point about the important role of parish and town councils. Should the existing community tier in 92% of England be the building block of neighbourhood arrangements in LGR/Devo? Yes or no, and why? Colin, quickly.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the parish councils are that unit of local government that is built around identifiable local communities of place. We talk about placemaking. Our places already exist. We don't need to make any more or create any more. And parishes are the ones that operate at that particular level of government that enable people to feel that something is close to them. And I know, having spoken to many parish councillors, they will say, folk come about something that's a district responsibility or a borough or a county responsibility. Doesn't matter because there's a close point. And the other thing about parishes, and I know some people say, oh, well, it is another layer of elected local government that has a legitimacy and has a voice for local communities. And communities of real place are often forgotten about. We've moved so far away in our local government structure from it being based on place that we have to have this idea of place making. They're already there, as I said, and parishes are the unit that control. So absolutely they should be. And one of the very worrying points that the government has raised is that no more parish councils while this process is going on in certain areas. And I think that's a grave error, personally.
Many thanks. Rachel, do you want to come in quickly on any of that before we go to our last question?
Yeah, no, just quickly, just to say, yeah, absolutely agree. And I think that, it goes back to like what's it for, who's it for? And with all the changes and kind of the reconfiguration in the, in some new unitaries now, you're going to have areas that are just totally so different, polar opposites, just all like chucked in together. And it's just different. It's like chalk and cheese. So if you don't have that local voice right there for the people at the coalface to get their views in, make sure that we're serving them in the way, it'll be different for each community, for each area. You can't just say, well, that's the solution to it, and then that's what we're going to do, because it doesn't work in that way. If this is genuinely about kind of devolution and genuinely about kind of doing the right thing by our electorate, and like local government's what it is, democratic process. I'm quite passionate about that, and just making sure those voices at parish, whether you like it or not, they're an integral part, and they do that job. They are the bridge, and it's not less bridge, it's more bridge. We need to open it up even more, in my view.
Many thanks, Rachel. Well, okay, the 5-minute klaxon is going to sound. We've got a last question, and by golly, we might have answered them all. Looking through the other end of the telescope to the combined authorities, Liam McNulty asks basically what the costs and benefits of the new form, and he makes the distinction that look, combined authorities, it's a strategic role for the mayors. They don't have social care responsibilities. What are costs and benefits of the new two-tier we're moving into with mayoral strategic authorities ultimately, and the unitaries we're creating beneath them in LGR areas, or which exist already where they are? Costs and benefits, is it worth it? What's the prize?
I'm happy to have a go. We could be here for some time, though.
Go for it, Graham.
Well, I mean, there isn't really a straightforward answer to that, is there? Because I think there are opportunities that are there in terms of, I think, so certainly from my perspective, I would say that government, whether we might disagree as to why central government feels the need to do this, but the fact remains that in order for devolution and for some of the conversations to be around things like total place and more devolution and more powers to local government, for those things to happen, this process seems to unlock that. And some of the conversations that we're having now are conversations that we've really struggled to have in the past. Now, why there is that direct link is perhaps for others to discuss, but the fact is that it's there, and I do think there is something about local government needing to build confidence, both from within the centre, but also in the public as well, and to create that trust within the public that we are, or the sector is able to perform, and I think this process is potentially part of that, and is opening up some of those conversations that were not happening previously. Now, and there is, people would argue that there are opportunities around efficiency. I think and others would reject that, and would see the distance between some of these new organisations, both combined authorities and unitaries, as being too distant from local communities. So, I think almost in every benefit you could put forward, and almost any cost you could put forward, there will be an alternative view, which is probably why we're having this webinar, and why we probably had this webinar 30 years ago, and we may well be having the same one in 30 years' time.
Who knows? Final thoughts, Martin, Rachel, Colin, on that, and then, as promised, I will class dismiss at 12 o'clock. You can bring your toys into school, I don't care. Colin, Rachel, Martin, any final thoughts your side, please?
Just very quickly then, we haven't touched on the reduction in number of councillors, which I think is a chilling effect of the ministry's website gleefully reported that there'll be 800 councillors. I can't remember whether they said wiped out, removed, a hit put on them, or whatever term. 800 councillors gone. There's another estimate from the ministry that once reorganisation is finished, we will have 5,000 fewer councillors. Now, we already have the fewest number of councillors across Europe. We have the largest representative ratio for our councillors. We are hollowing out local democracy. For a long time, we spoke about hollowing out local government. We are now in the process of hollowing out local democracy, and it's a chilling effect of this reorganisation.
Many thanks, Colin. Final couple of words, Martin and Rachel, then I'll wrap up.
Can I just add to that, that point just raised? Yes. And also just on the staffing. So that means, as well, like the same individuals, key individuals now, they already have really challenging roles, kind of working right up to, they can't really put anything more in with less is more, but then there is more. And then it is literally a bit about the pragmatism and the reality check of kind of holding that. Again, it's like multiplied, isn't it? Amount of responsibility, complexity, and it's the same individuals who already are quite at burnout, then you're going to take on all of that as well. There is that worry as well, just like, you know, what gets dropped in that process, because invariably that's just real life. That's how it works. So that is a bit of a worry.
Final quick word with you, Martin, before we course a wrap.
I mean, maybe to end on a positive note after all the concerns raised. I think local government is just very good at making things work, and when it has practical problems and practical issues, despite all the complications we've talked about, I'm pretty confident it will make these new unitaries work. It won't be easy, it'll be bumpy, but I think local government proved time and again, I mean, COVID, other things, set it a practical challenge, and it's really pretty good at getting to the right result in the end. So, a bit of optimism perhaps.
Martin, thank you for, especially before Easter, imparting a message of hope before show is over. And thanks again to all our fantastic panelists, Colin, Graham, Rachel and yourself, Martin. Thanks to everyone who joined the webinar, put in such great questions. We hope you enjoyed it. We'll be running more LGR and local government policy webinars over the course of the year, but show's over. Take wonderful care. Happy, joyful Easters, everyone. And Martin, all the best for your 5 marathons in 5 days. You hero. Take great care, everyone. Thank you.